retreat. I'll start with an introduction to Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake and our One Water Partnership Program, which is the program that is bringing you this evening's event. We will then move into our land acknowledgement and an open reflection and prayer by Rabbi Debbie Wechsler from Amuno Congregation and Schools. Then we will watch the film together. We will introduce the panelists and they will share some remarks. And then we will have a discussion and question and answer session. While we proceed through the evening, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. And if you have a specific panelist that you would like to address your question, go ahead and make sure that you include the panelist's name in the chat question as well, so we make sure that we direct it to the right person. So that is our program that is tonight. Next slide, please. So tonight we're going to begin. So as I mentioned, I am with Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. Our mission is to inspire and equip people of faith to honor and protect and restore our shared watershed. We often quote Wendell Berry, and he said, "Do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you." Or to borrow from Dr. King's words, "Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And this is the same for our shared watershed." Next slide, please. So Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake works as a translator and between and among faith communities, local governments, and even funders. So we work together to bring all those groups together to work on a shared vision of a clean Chesapeake Bay. We do this with, I do this with the help of great support and wonderful direction from Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake staff. On the call tonight, we have Jody Rose, our Executive Director. As I mentioned, I'm the Outreach Manager. Matt Hying is the One Water Partnership Program Director. Taylor Swanson is also with us tonight. He's our Communications and Outreach Coordinator. And we also have Josh Cohn, the Chesapeake Conservation Corps member. I am Bonnie Sorak, ITC's Outreach Manager. I've been blessed to work with ITC for almost 8 years. I'm a member of the Columbia Jewish Congregation in Howard County, Maryland, where I served as their Green Team chairperson for 12 years. I also serve on the Jewish Community Relations Council of Howard County, which is a committee of the Jewish Federation of Howard County. And I also serve on the Howard County Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday Commission. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, this program is a program of our flagship program, which is the One Water Partnership. Most of my efforts over these years have concentrated in Central Maryland, and I've assisted hundreds of congregations to bring their care for creation visions to reality. But the work is done in all of these hub locations, including Anne Arundel County, Baltimore City and County, Hartford, Howard, and the Lower Eastern Shore, and even up as far as Pennsylvania and Lancaster County. If you don't see your location mentioned here, don't fret. We are constantly growing, and we're always looking for new congregations and new folks to join our networks. And even if you're not affiliated with a congregation or don't feel you follow a particular spiritual practice, we hope you will feel welcome at all of our events. All our people are concerned and caring about the watershed where they are. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the One Water Partnership, as we work in hubs of activity, we also try to do programming together. So this is the first of a 4-part series of our Chesapeake Conversations. You will see that we have 3 more coming up, one in February, March, and April. In February, we will be focusing on healing habitats, landscaping with creation in mind. In March, we will be doing a program focusing on youth and climate change. And then in April, we will be looking at a celebration for Earth Day and the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. So you should see in the chat box a link to IPC's events page where you can register for all of these events and more. And our next upcoming session will be on Sunday, January 30th. We will be leading a legislative briefing on the Maryland legislature, and also our Faithful Green Leaders training that starts in February. Next slide, please. Oh, we're already there. So, of course, on a night like tonight, we want to recognize all our wonderful sponsors and funders. This program is brought to you by the congregations that are in the Oakland Mills Interfaith Center, and many of their members have joined us this evening, so we welcome them. Also, as I mentioned, the Office of Human Rights and Equity in Howard County, the Martin Luther King Holiday Commission, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Howard County, and then also our funders, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the Baltimore City Department of Public Works, Baltimore County, and our friends at the Chesapeake Bay Trust. Next slide, please. So I am in Ellicott City, Maryland, and I am on the land of the Susquehannock tribe. I invite you to click on the link that is in the chat box to find the name of the territory where you are located. And as I read our land acknowledgement now, please think of those people that came before. Today, we wish to hold space for reflection on and gratitude for the land upon which we live and the local waters that support and nourish us all. We recognize this land and these waters are stewarded by many who came before. For tens of thousands of years, Algonquin-speaking cousins called the shores of the Chesapeake home. Although we have lost many names, we ask you to honor them for their stewardship of these ancient lands and waters. Our hearts are full of hope as we come together with honor for all life. All right, so we move to our next slide. Tonight, we will begin our program with a reflection and a prayer by Rabbi Deborah Wechsler from Amuno Congregation and Schools. So Deborah Wechsler is the rabbi at Amuno Congregation and Schools located in Baltimore, Maryland. She has served Amuno since 1999. Her portfolio includes preaching and pastoral work, as well as teaching in all of the schools of the congregations. She oversees its Gimlet Hasidim, which means social action activities. In addition to working with the youth of the congregation from pre-B'nai Mitzvah through college, she also teaches adult education. She is the first woman to serve as rabbi of Amuno Congregation. Deborah received her rabbinic ordination as well as a Master of Arts degree from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in Manhattan. She's the mother of Rena, 16, and Reuben, 14. Welcome, Rabbi Wechsler.
Thank you. Thank you to Bonnie and Interfaith Partners of the Chesapeake. It's a partnership that we at Amuno have treasured for many years. And we've been so proud to be a part of this work and to partner with you, and are especially grateful to be invited this evening to set the tone for us. 2,000 years ago, one of our Jewish texts called the Mishnah told us about this very day on the calendar. It explained that each year had multiple new years. Just like today, we have a new year for school, a new year for taxes, a new year for the government, and a new year for years, which we just celebrated. 2,000 years ago, the Mishnah told us that there was a new year for animals, a new year for kings, a new year for tithing, and a new year for trees. The new year for the trees was commanded to be celebrated on the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat, which is today. The 15th of Shvat is celebrated as an ancient and authentic Jewish Earth Day, with the planting of trees in climates that support planting in January, by advocating for responsible stewardship of the land, and of course, with eating and drinking varied products of the land, like wine, nuts, and fruits. This year, The confluence of the Hebrew calendar and the Gregorian calendar means that we are celebrating the birthday of the trees and Martin Luther King Jr. Day, the day chosen to honor the birth, life, and dream of the Reverend Dr. King. This confluence seems important and meaningful, especially at this moment in history. In both, we see the planting of seeds that anticipate the later flowering of a dream. There's an ancient Jewish story about a man named Choni, the circle maker, who was a 2nd century teacher, important skill in ancient and modern worlds. One day, Choni was journeying on the road and he saw a man planting a carob tree. He asked him, "How long does it take for this tree to bear fruit?" The man replied, 70 years. Choni then asked, "Are you certain that you will live another 70 years?" The man replied, "I found carob trees in the world, as my fathers planted these for me. So I too plant these for my children." Both the 15th of Shvat, Tu B'Shvat, and Martin Luther King Day are about celebrating trees and our natural world, and celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. King. But perhaps more importantly, both of these holidays are about continuing ourselves the work that has been done by others before us. They planted seeds so that we could live and flourish today. We do the same so that in 70 years or 700 years, our children and grandchildren can enjoy the fruit of those trees. One could argue that the values celebrated on the 3rd Monday in January are values that can and should be observed every day of the year, that the struggle for civil liberties, equality, and seeing human beings as created in the divine image are tasks to be actualized in every moment. And also that every day should be the birthday of the trees, in which we enjoy the fruit of the land and advocate for its responsible stewardship. But we human beings have short memories and many things that occupy us. Our traditions set aside these days of action, of service, of remembrance and celebration to make sure that our commitments to the highest ideals of our faiths are constantly renewed. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, God, source of all, through whose word all things come into being. And together we say, Amen.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Wechsler, for bringing those threads together on this very, very important day. As we move into the next slide, we will be showing the film. It is a short 10-minute film. I want to just let you know that at the beginning of the film, it is quiet. So it's not that your sound isn't working, it is quiet. So just hold on and you'll see there'll be some slides with some captions. Just hold on and then you'll hear the film start. So go ahead and start, please.
There we go.
You want to be muted.
Why? I want to hear you talk.
In 1975, construction of what was officially designated as Interstate 170 began between Mulberry and Franklin Streets on the city's west side. However, the original plans for an expressway through these neighborhoods began decades earlier at the heavy hand of the nefarious Robert Moses, the father of American urban renewal. Ultimately, construction of I-170 was abruptly halted in 1979 after grassroots community leaders and environmental activists organized and protested its completion. But the damage was already done. The highway to nowhere, a nearly 1.5 mile long wound ripped through the heart of Old West Baltimore, historically one of the most vibrant Black communities in the United States.
We are standing on one of the overpasses for the failed I-170 expansion, which we call the Highway to Nowhere, because it is a roughly 1.5 mile stretch of highway that is a, eyesore and a scar through the center of Old West Baltimore. Roughly 900 to 1,000 Black families working to middle class, as well as the businesses, the churches, and other institutions that make up a community were disrupted by the Highway to Nowhere, both in Harlem Park and in Poppleton. Because Harlem Park, you had the Harlem Theater, Sergeant Major Violet White lived there. You also had Dr. Camper. It's one of the centers of Black life in Baltimore, in Harlem Park, which was heavily disrupted by the development of the Highway to Nowhere. First, you have to consider that Harlem Park, again, is what we would call a working to middle class. I mean, the reality of it was a Black community doing segregation. So you had all the kinds of Blacks, right? All the Black people, all the Black institutions. So to have a portion of the community literally disappeared, right, for a federal structure that was not designed to service them, right? Wasn't designed to service Poppleton or Harlem Park that remained. It really was designed to service white people entering and exiting Baltimore City. Like, it was there to serve commerce. So it is essentially the erasure of both Black lives and Black communities, because when you displace Black families, particularly elders, you shorten their lifespan. So it is an actual erasure.
Life growing up on Bright Street was like a family. Everybody knew each other. The kids played together. Neighbors looked out for one another. So it was like a family orientation type. There was none of that shooting and stabbing, and I can't even remember that. But everything was right there that you needed to survive within that community. There's your small market, then there was your larger market, there was a movie theater, there was a small car dealership. You know, for the matured folks, the older folks, there's your lounge. The children didn't know much of what was going on as far as business. All we knew that we saw construction that was taking away some of our play area, or it was separating and dividing us. So we really didn't know. We just knew that a highway was being built. Being older and living the life that I've lived and knowing the things that I know, now when I look back on it, I can see maybe some of the politics that was in this. And this was like, okay, we want to create some way to increase the speed of ridership from one part of town to another part of town. And in doing this, how can we do it to kind of like keep it away from what's what I'm looking for? To keep it away from, let's just say, negative perceived areas.
I'm Darin, Senior Operations Manager at Blue Water Baltimore. My connection to the highway of nowhere is planting the 477 trees to help revitalize the corridor with the Baltimore Tree Trust and the Maryland Port Administration. Blue Water Baltimore realized the highway to nowhere was an environmental problem for the neighborhoods, really bad air quality coming from all these cars running. And then at the same time, we had first thought with all this pavement, you could do something to control the runoff. We looked at whether we could do a stormwater project right to our right and left or rain gardens. We weren't able to do that, and so we thought, well, what is the next best thing we can do? And so planting trees really helps reduce runoff, slow down the water, cool the neighborhoods, and improve the air quality. Who needed to do environmental restoration projects. They were able to fund the project, and then we engaged volunteers to help plant 477 trees over 0.8 of a mile. I mean, it's not a solution, right? But it helps. So the idea is someday this would be a forest, and it would be absorbing a lot of the particulate matter, the ozone, and the other air pollution that the cars are relieving, and hopefully cool the area for the neighborhood and just make it pretty. I mean, trees are driving down this thing, right? It's like a concrete jungle. It's not very welcoming. This is one of the major gateways to Baltimore. Right. And these neighborhoods have been cut off, and we're a group that's trying to improve the environmental justice for Baltimore residents, and they got their neighborhoods cut in half.
The development of the highway to nowhere opened the door for slow displacement of Black people, erasure of Black lives, and erasure of Black history in Baltimore.
This is Bonnie again. And as we reflect on what we just saw and learned, I'd like to explain that this is a short 10-minute trailer. Sean Yost from 2M Media and Donzel Brown from the Environmental Justice Journalism Initiative created this short film with the goal of producing a full-length documentary. The trailer is free and available at the EJJI website. It is also posted in the chat. We will now transition to hearing from tonight's panelists. Next slide, please. Great. Our first panelist is Nneka Nnamdi, who you saw featured in the film. Nneka is a Baltimore-based entrepreneur engaged in social mission-driven business and community wellness work. She endeavors to apply a mix of traditional African and modern African-American social, economic, and spiritual practices as a framework for living. As a member of the Living Well team, she curates community space for artistic, economic, and social ventures. Skilled in creating healing spaces and teaching practical ways of managing trauma, Nneka and her sister Maya Anyongo have created Sister Gather, events for women of African descent to bond, heal, and grow. Her study includes initiation in the practice of IFA, Principles of Trauma-Informed Care, as well as a master's in management with a specialization in organizational leadership. Her artistic experiences include West African dance with Sankofa Dance Theater, Disimbem Urban Foley, Womb Works, and #Baltimore Girls. She is a graduate of two of Baltimore's most prestigious educational institutions, Baltimore Polytechnic Institute and Morgan State University. She lives in Upton. Upton is one of Baltimore's most storied but blighted neighborhoods, and her lived experience there has given birth to Fight Blight Baltimore, a social and environmental justice tool for residents to identify, report, track, and remediate blight. Our second panelist is Reverend Brenda White. Pastor White is an ordained itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. She is a graduate of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, and the Wesley Theological Seminary of Washington, D.C. Her pursuit of higher education began with a one-way Greyhound bus ticket and $5 in cash when she left South Carolina and traveled to Baltimore, Maryland to enroll at UMBC. Pastor White is an avid reader, committed to lifelong learning. Pastor White answered her call and entered the ordained ministry on November 12, 1989. Over the past 30 years, she has ministered the word of the Lord in ecumenical and culturally diverse venues. Pastor White enjoys her calling to work with the marginalized, those often overlooked and dismissed by the status quo. It is her intention to raise up people who will hear God's voice and follow after God with a committed heart. For 5 years, she has served as the founding pastor of the New Hope A.M.E. Church in Hanover, Maryland. Currently, she serves as the pastor of the Allen A.M.E. Church in Baltimore, Maryland. Pastor White loves to teach and preach the good news of Jesus Christ, and she feels called to teach Christians how to make practical use of their faith in everyday life. Additionally, Pastor White is a devoted runner who also enjoys walking along trails and through botanical gardens. And finally, our third panelist is Darin, the Senior Operations Manager at Blue Water Baltimore, who is also featured in the film. Darin oversees Blue Water Baltimore's restoration program. He manages restoration and engagement project planning to slow down runoff and filter out pollution. From planting trees in a neighbor's yard to installing larger rain garden projects, Blue Water Baltimore is trying to model projects that others can replicate throughout the watershed, either in their own yards or on public or private properties. His favorite part of the job is partnering with communities to implement hands-on projects that improve water quality and achieve community goals. Darin has a BS in biology and is a certified professional horticulturist. In his spare time, Darin enjoys running on local trails in the Baltimore area, hiking on trails, and being outside and observing nature's majesty. Darin also enjoys fishing, catfishing, fly tip fishing, well, basically any kind of fishing he thinks is awesome. So welcome to our panelists. We're going to kick off with Nneka, who's going to start off. So let's move on to her first slide.
Good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Nnamdi, creator of Fight Blight, Bmore, and co-creator of the Stop Oppressive Seizures Fund. My work centers around equitable community development and blight remediation. I just kind of wanted to give some additional context to what we all saw in Disruption, the Highway to Nowhere. The map in front of you presents what was planned in terms of highway development for Baltimore in the 1950s under the Federal Highway Act. And the Highway to Nowhere is one of the few sections of those plans that actually came into being. And that's despite the organized resistance of Black residents to the highway in Harlem Park and Poppleton. Even though they resisted, even though they organized, even though they worked with residents and organizers for planned parts of the highway in other parts of the city, the highway was rammed through anyway. And for clarity's sake, you know, it is simply because of race. It is simply because the residents of Harlem Park and Poppleton were Black, that they lost their homes and community as a part of the Federal Highway Act. It's important to note, and we think about what happened with the Highway to Nowhere, that this was the third or fourth displacement of Black families, Black communities, and Black people. Next slide. Displacement, when we think about it, is a traumatic event that damages individual, family, and communities' social, emotional, and economic health. In the case of Black folks, it is a complex and compound community trauma, having been displaced first from Africa during the Great Ma'afa, then often from the deeper South, and then from neighborhoods around the water, followed by this displacement from central West Baltimore. Next slide. The legacy of the Highway to Nowhere can be seen in a number of different ways, but one of the key ways to look at it is that both Poppleton and Harlem Park are 50% vacant. And that's only when you look at one level of blight, because there are 5 forms of blight: vacancy, abandonment, dilapidation, underutilization, and misutilization. So if we just look at the level of vacancy in Harlem Park and Poppleton, we see that the neighborhoods have had a slow decline since the Highway to Nowhere came into being in the 1970s. And so it's odd to think of neighborhoods being 50% vacant in a city that has 3,000 homeless people on any given night, and where 30% of the population are housing insecure. That is to say, they pay more than 50% of their income in housing on any given day. And so this is the real legacy, like the slow decline of Harlem Park and Poppleton that starts with the construction of the Highway to Nowhere. And that damage is so pervasive that we see it in multiple levels, right? We see it in the vacancy, but we also see it in the fact that the schools are underutilized, right? We see it, and that happens because of the disinvestment in Baltimore City public schools when you lose the property tax base. Next slide. And so now there's a lot of talk about what to do with the Highway to Nowhere, given the historic investments in infrastructure and COVID relief that are becoming available from the federal government. And I really caution folks not to get too excited, because if we really look at the history, it's the state and federal governments that actually created the scar that is the Highway to Nowhere in the first place. And that they do have a responsibility to refund repair, but they do not have the right to define what repair looks like. And so the people with lived experience with blight, the people with lived experience with racist community development and transportation policy are the ones who have a right to define what the solutions are. And so this is what you see in front of you as a framework for redevelopment of the Highway to Nowhere. That is that it should center leadership of community developers that have a Black worldview. It should complement any community-led development that is already in process or being planned. It should provide priority ownership of property to those who are displaced or their heirs. It should apply inclusionary zoning for culturally appropriate land use. It should provide funding and technical assistance for Black businesses and institutions to own and operate in the Harlem Park and Poppleton footprint. It should reconnect Harlem Park and Poppleton, and any street names and buildings, city-owned facilities or state and federal facilities in the footprint should be renamed to reflect this cultural reclamation. Next slide. It is, within that framework, there's already a lot of work being done, right? The resistance to the continued displacement of people in Harlem Park and Poppleton has continued. We have organized Poppleton. They're fighting to secure and save the Edie family home and the Sarah Ann Street houses. You'll hear from a pastor of A.M.E. about their garden and land reclamation projects. Parity Homes is doing equitable development of 30 or more homes in Harlem Park. The SOS Fund is supporting housing stabilization by clearing property taxes and other municipal debts. There are a lot of legal service advocates that are providing estate planning services, and there are many community activists working toward developing a land reclamation and reparations platform. Next slide. So just given the context of what has happened, but what also is happening today, please follow us and continue to engage and check out the work that we're doing. And I'll pass it back.
Thank you so much, Nneka. Next, we'll hear from Pastor Brenda White from Allen A.M.E. Church and Pathway Forward. So
Good evening. Good evening, and thank you so much to the Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake as well as the One Water Baltimore. Thank you, Ms. Nnamdi, for leading us off. I am Brenda White. I am the pastor of Allen African Methodist Episcopal Church in West Baltimore. Let me begin by sharing the mission of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. It is to minister to the spiritual, intellectual, physical, emotional, and environmental needs of all people by speaking Christ's liberating gospel through word and deed. Listen now to a quote that I want to share with you. The church must take Martin Luther King Jr. back from the civil rights movement. You heard me. The church must take Martin Luther King Jr. back from the civil rights movement. These words were spoken by Dr. Deirdre Crewell, my professor of teaching and formation at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. These are words that I've always remembered. 25 plus years ago, Dr. Crewell issued this challenge to her students who would become teaching pastors and Christian educators. I now understand better than I did then the point my seminary professor was making. First and foremost, Dr. King was a preacher of the good news of Jesus Christ. And to that end, I invite you beyond today to go to YouTube to listen to a sermon that you can find. It is his sermon entitled Paul's Letter to American Christians. It was delivered at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama on the 4th of November, 1956. Paul's Letter to American Christians. It's important to keep in mind that the day before Dr. King was killed, he came to Memphis, Tennessee to help striking sanitation workers. These were primarily Black workers who did the most dangerous and the dirty work. There were health and safety concerns. Assassinated at the age of 39, reportedly, his autopsy said his heart resembled that of a 60-year-old. 39, murdered, gunned down, but his heart at his autopsy resembled that of someone who was 60 years of age. I contend and submit to you that what he did then has great impact for what happens now. When you think of creation care, climate justice, environmental justice, everyone should have, is entitled to toxic-free water, toxic-free land, and toxic-free air. And Bonnie made a reference to this quote earlier, and I'll share this again with you. It comes from Dr. King. It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We're not going to have peace on earth until we recognize this basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. I serve at Allen A.M.E. Church, Allen African Methodist Episcopal Church. I'm on the Mulberry side of the highway to nowhere. There are at least three zip codes that combine that area. When we look at what has happened within that area and what it means in terms of storm drain, water, and flooding in that area, when you look at Allen, which is in the 1100 block of West Lexington Street, Allen is the only structure standing within a 2-block, square block radius. All the homes are gone. What does that mean for stormwater? What does that mean for flooding? It means that there are not families, there are not households, there are not people to clear the storm drains on a regular. It also means that we are a part of that 421 vacant lots. There's so many vacant lots in West Baltimore. The city can't possibly have the budget to keep up with cutting them. What Allen Baltimore did through its nonprofit entity, Pathway Forward, last year was to collaborate with the city of Baltimore to cut 14 vacant lots. Not much, but it made a world of difference. This year, we're going to do more. But to keep the lots clean and to be able to form a green team and to be able to hire teenagers at $11.75 an hour to help to invest in the cleaning of their community, because the water flows downhill. And when that water, when it's raining, or like it's snow like we're having now, when it melts, if those drains are clogged, then the houses further down will become flooded. And it takes away from the value of our community. And so what we are looking to do and wanting to do and are determined to do is to make the difference where we are, to make the difference and to show how the concrete jungle of the highway to nowhere has an environmental impact on the residents. Yes, we're separated from Harlem Park, but there's even greater damage done to our water, to our air, and to our land. And one of the bright spots that we're seeing here is coming together, working with groups, putting together pollinators, putting together gardens. Some of you might have seen when the interview with the Baltimore Ravens, where I said the birds are back. And that came from an anecdotal story that one of the neighbors shared with me that said, "Pastor, the birds are back." And I said, "What do you mean the birds are back?" The neighbor said, "You put the garden here and the birds have come back to Poppleton. We have not seen birds in this community. The birds are back, the bees are back, and we pray hope is back." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor White. Oh, yes, glad to hear your birds are back. Now we're going to move on to Darin with Blue Water Baltimore.
Yep. So thanks, Bonnie, for having us. Thank you to Interfaith Partners, and thanks for EG for inviting us to be in the video. So Blue Water Baltimore's mission is to restore the environmental quality of our rivers, streams, and foster a healthy environment, strong economy, and thriving communities. We like to say clean water can't occur without strong communities. Next slide. And we do it through core interventions, restoration, advocacy, and engagement, partnering with governments and partnering with communities to make our work possible. Next slide. So we're focusing on core interventions, as Pastor Brenda talked about, with the flooding and stormwater that are really degrading our streams. Sewage is a big thing, as well as the toxic pollution. So we're fighting sewage backups in homes, focusing on compliance with the city's consent decree, as well as fighting for residents who have sewage backups in their homes. Partnering with Baltimore City and Tree Baltimore to increase the tree canopy and reduce urban heat island in our neighborhoods. We have a great water keeper and monitoring program where we find pollution problems, we see how clean the water is, and that helps us guide our restoration and education actions. But we also follow up on pollution complaints. So recently, there was a fish kill in the Jones Falls. We followed up that and found the polluter and holding them accountable, and also with the city's wastewater treatment plants. We found violations of both of those, and we're in a legal action involved with the city. So we really can't do our projects without community. And one of our big partnerships focuses on churches with One Water Partnership and Interfaith Partners of the Chesapeake. And on the left, we have cistern installation at Mount Lebanon Baptist Church. We also engage volunteers in our events, tree plantings and cleanups to take action and reduce pollution. Next slide. But the highway, if you guys haven't walked the area, it's crazy. As Pastor Brenda said, it's a concrete jungle. It's a scar. The soil that's in there is subsoil. So when we planted the trees, they had a really tough time to survive. And no one uses it. I mean, yes, the motorists use it. But the pedestrians, you'll see on the slide on the left, there's a small footpath going across. That's facing MLK near Schroeder. And then all the other way to the train station, there's nothing in between. So next slide. So as the video talked about, we planted 477 trees and started the process of healing, started the process of environmental justice. Next slide. So this project involved a lot of partners. Once the Red Line project was canceled, we sought to bring environmental justice solution to the community to improve the site. And so we planted the 477 trees. It's over 0.8 of a mile, the area that we planted, in crappy soils, as I said, very poor soils at the spot. We've been growing them, just like we grow our neighborhoods. We have to grow trees, and our partners with the Maryland Port Administration, the Baltimore Tree Trust, and the Department of Transportation. We engaged YouthWorks in summer maintenance and volunteers on tap to plant the project. And since 2017, we've been watering. We've replanted trees because we care about our projects and want to make it a success. We've established 92% of the original 477 trees at the site. We also, because the site is kind of secluded, we reported multiple illegal dumpings under Fulton Avenue. But we know that this project helps to transform the neighborhood, but it does not make for the scar to the communities and people who are cut off and displaced in the 70s. The highway to nowhere does not bring environmental justice, but we're excited about what could be next. So next slide. The federal government has a bill in Congress, which may never pass, but it did have money appropriated to end highways to nowhere. So that's one opportunity. Next slide. But what I think is really exciting is the process that Nneka laid out, and how do we set up a framework for healing the highway to nowhere. And so these are just some of the environmental ideas that we had that would be combined with what the community really needs and wants, and how do we repair Poppleton and Harlan Park. So could we have a solar farm there? Could be solar on top of the redevelopment project. As we refill the scar to the highway to nowhere, can we put carbon sequestration, soil, biochars? Both Brenda and I like to run. Lots of people like to run. Could it be a greenway? There is a greenway up on top, but down in the canyon, it's kind of strange. So anyways, here's a number of different things that could be combined with the community's vision to start healing Baltimore and to really get us back on track to be a great city. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darin, and all of our panelists. So now we get to move into questions and answers, and I see there's been lots popping in there. But before I go through those, I'd like to ask for all of our panelists, so what does repair look like? To your mind, what does repair look like? Nneka, I don't know if you want to start.
Well, so for me, I actually live in Upton, which the corner of Upton that I live in, or Heritage Crossing, is right. I can see the highway to nowhere from the corner of where I live. And so I'm going to speak in this moment very much for myself. The repair looks like, to me, having space that community has ownership, control, or stewardship of, to design, to take care of our basic needs. And that is food, clothes, shelter, water, air, in the way that we need it. So to me, repair looks like seeding control, seeding funding to those with the lived experience in Harlan Park, and in Upton, in Poppleton, and all of those neighborhoods who were damaged by the development of the highway to nowhere.
Thank you. Pastor Brenda, did you have something you would like to add?
For me, as a Baltimore City resident and as one who pastors in Baltimore City and the community in which I serve as pastor, healing to me looks like land that's available for persons to purchase and to build homes and have restorative communities. Home ownership is vital to stabilization of any community. And in lieu of that, and not in lieu of, but in addition to that, that even more organized green teams are formed in order to maintain until currently Pathway Forward is maintaining a whole square block. And that's where we keep the grass clean, cut. Thanks to Lowe's home team, we have a supersized pollinator garden that's on the vacant lots. And so to continue to educate creation care, educate persons about creation care, and get people actively involved, the neighbors who live, the remaining neighbors who live there, to get their opinion, get them involved in stabilizing the community. But for Pathway Forward, it really would be more of a jungle than it is.
Great, thank you so much. And Darin, I think your slide showed what some of your ideas are for what repair looks like. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Well, I mean, when we have the highway to nowhere is cut off these Black and brown communities, and we need an anti-racist solution. So what does that look like? And they're in charge, and it should be about restoring the neighborhoods and the people who are there. So, and we should if we can get some environmental, we'll get everything, because the environment's important to all of us. So we can combine those two. It's going to take a long time too.
And Bonnie, I would say a part of the issues that, and Ms. Nnamdi used the word erasure. There's so many people that are gone. And so when you say come to the table, who's coming to the table when the people have been displaced?
Excellent point. Excellent point. Thank you. All right, I'm going to move on. We've got lots of questions here, and I know we have limited time, so let's see what we can do. Do any of the panelists have any insight on this? With the infrastructure money going to Maryland this year, will any money be used in Baltimore for these communities?
I could give a little context to that. We know that the elected officials, both local, state, and federal, had a presser where they talked about the federal money and talked about how it might be used to correct the highway to nowhere, which is good. Again, I just like to caution that whatever federal money, whatever state money, whatever local money comes in, the money should be directed to projects that are defined by the folks who are in community right now and those folks that can be located that were displaced by the highway to nowhere and the subsequent disinvestment in Harlem Park and Poppleton. So the money could be coming. It's a matter though, because the creation of the highway to nowhere came as the result of federal money. And so it's not so much about, in as much as it is about the money, it is also about who is controlling and making the decisions about what is to happen with that money.
Thank you. So why were there protests against a highway going through Highlandtown led by Barbara Mikowski successful, while the opposition against the highway to nowhere were unsuccessful until too late?
I think the answer to that is simple. The people in Highlandtown were white and the people in Poppleton and Harlem Park were Black. That is the absolute only difference. And it is key to note that the folks in Harlem Park and Poppleton organized with the folks in Highlandtown. They organized with the folks in Canton and Fells Point that would have all been displaced if the highway had been completed as planned. And so, you know, in Southeast Baltimore, the plans were stopped because the residents were white. And in Central West Baltimore, the plans were not stopped because the residents were Black. That's the only difference.
Heartbreaking. Thank you. Are there pictures of this area before the digging started? Is there a map of the specific streets affected? It appears to be roughly 1 square mile of area. Is that correct? Anybody know? Our filmmaker is on and has done some of the research that had the pictures in the film. Do we know if there are any pictures?
Yeah, I mean, you saw some of the historic photos, obviously, that were in the film. It was hard for me to locate actual photos like pre-dig, like photos of the construction itself. But I'm certain that there are photos of those communities just prior to the commencement of that construction. I just haven't found them, but I will.
Not only that, we could use the Bromley and Sanborn fire maps from everything. I think they stopped making them in the 50s, but from the 1880s to the 50s, they had these insurance maps. So in terms of the layout of the Poppleton and Harlem Park prior to the development of the highway to nowhere, those maps do exist and can be found.
Wonderful. And if anyone on this call is aware and has some resources, let us know so we can work those into the full-length feature film when that happens.
And contact me directly if you do find those images, please.
In doing the outreach for this event tonight, we heard about a woman that had written a song about the highway to nowhere. So there's lots of work out there. There's lots of people that have been involved in this for years, and we're happy to bring folks together. Another question is, when I was a student at the School of Social Work in the 60s, we were told that Barbara Mikulski helped, this seems to be related. I'm sorry, that seems to be a duplicate, sorry. What efforts were made prior to the Trump era to replace the vacant buildings with new housing? Is the Biden administration doing anything now to help these neighborhoods? What about Mayor Scott? If the Build Back Better ever gets through the Congress, will money be dedicated to remediating the SCAR highway to nowhere? How is this being addressed in this early stage? And what is the community input? Does anybody know if there's housing funding available to help build back?
So the thing is, there's a lot of development happening. There's a lot of development planned, but much of the development that is happening and planned is not development that was led substantively by the community. A lot of the development is happening in spite of those who remain and not in a reparative fashion. And so I always like to focus on what is being done actually by folks in community. So organized Organized Poppleton is an example of community development or community maintenance that is being done, led by community. And in this case, Sonia Edie and her family, who are trying not only to keep their home from being demolished, but also keep the Sarah Ann Street homes from being demolished for their historical significance, in that Black folks have lived in the Sarah Ann Street houses since about 1870 or 1880. And so for that historical significance. So there are a lot of things that are happening, micro projects that are being developed by folks that are living in community. But there is money coming. There are things that are being done to try to address the vacancy. Councilperson Mosby just put out a housing plan that is aimed at stabilization, that we do have some critique about, but there are efforts. I say that to say that there are efforts at the local level to address some of the vacancy.
Great, thank you. I do want to respect everyone's time, and we do have a commitment from the panelists to hang out and answer more questions as we move forward. But I wanted to just mention a couple of things, and then those of you who need to drop off, we appreciate you being here. So as I mentioned at the end of the showing, that is a trailer. Someone had asked if there's a full documentary available. It's not ready yet. So Donzel Brown of the Environmental Justice Journalism Initiative is working on gathering funds together to so that they can make a full-length feature film of this. So I believe it was put in the chat box. You can email Donzel directly and his phone number. So just wanted to let you all know that. And then we're just going to move on to the slides for just a moment here and get through some things quickly, and then we'll go back to questions and answers for those people who can stay with us. So we are now on slide number 30. There we go, great. So what we're asking, I mentioned that this is the first of a 4-part series, our Chesapeake Conversations. What we'd like is for you to help us to make these better, to help us to improve. So there's in the chat box is a survey. Please take a few minutes, open it now and leave it on your computer, and you can answer it later. But we would love for you to let us know some feedback, let us know how we can do better. And then also we're looking at planning, we're already looking at planning next year's series, because this has been wildly successful as far as doing reaching so many people. So if you're available and want to help us to plan these types of events, please include that in your survey form. So just a couple briefly, Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. What we ask for those of you who are members of congregations, we have our congregation partner pledge that we would love for your congregation to join our network and take the pledge to care for God's creation. So that you can find on our website as well. And then our next Faithful Green Leaders training is coming up in February, starts on the 20th. It's a three afternoon training. We'd love to bring some more congregations into that training. You can find that on our events page. That should be in the chat as well. Also coming up is a legislative briefing on January 30th in the afternoon. This is centered on Maryland legislation. So if you're interested in hearing what's coming up as environmental issues move through the legislature, that's a great place to start. And I think Darin wanted to chime in here about some things that Blue Water Baltimore would love for you to come and help with.
Yeah, just quickly, we're pruning the trees on US 40. Think of it as a delayed birthday for them on February 19th. And then if you're ever curious about water pollution, Baltimore Water Watch is where we post our monitoring data, especially for bacteria and whether the streams are safe to swim in. And then Herring Run Nursery shop to get native plants in Baltimore. But I'm excited to continue the dialogue. I'm really excited.
Wonderful, great, thanks. So join us in Blue Water Baltimore at these events. And now we're gonna move on to our closing prayer. So how we're going to do our closing prayer is Pastor Brenda White has offered to take the leader role in saying the prayer. My colleague, Taylor from IPC will unmute and he will be the voice of the people, but we suggest that you can speak along with him even though you're staying muted when we do the portion of the people, and then we will end with an amen. So Pastor White, if you can unmute, and Taylor, if you can lead the closing prayer.
God of justice and peace, creator of the universe, spirit of hope and life, bless us to carry on the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, a servant to the cause of justice, who said, "Say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness, and all of the other shallow things will not matter."
Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream.
May we, through our actions, caring for our communities and the wider web of life, honor King's words. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly.
Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness, like an ever-flowing stream.
May our own legacy echo commitment to diversity and inclusion expressed by him as a great world house in which we have to live together, Black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu, a family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interests, who, because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace.
Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness, like an ever-flowing stream. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. So please, if you continue, we can go back to the questions that we still have. But for those of you who are ready to sign off, thank you so much for coming. Please fill out the survey before you log off for the evening. And I would like to end with just one parting thought from my favorite quote from the Hebrew Mishnah. You are not obligated to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. So as we heard, this goes along with Dr. King's famous quote, everyone can be great because anyone can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. So let's get to work, all of us together. Thank you all for coming. And for those that want to stick around, we will go back to questions and answers. So for my panelists, this question was for Darin. Do residents have the ability to turn vacant lots into gardens, orchards, or wildflower meadows if they want? How would we get permission to do that?
So if the lot is owned by the city, there's the city's Adopt a Lot program, and there's a process laid out for that. Normally you want to partner with the community nonprofit for that. And then there's grants available. So yeah, definitely that's possible.
We have lots of congregations that are also interested in doing that, is adopting a lot near them and doing that. So we're happy to help you with that. Here's another question for Darin. Darin, you're a popular guy. You mentioned the canceled Red Line. How do the Harlem Park and Poppleton communities feel about the Red Line? Are they happy it was canceled, or do they wish it had been built as a means of improving public transportation? I don't know that Darin is the best one to answer
defer
that.
to Nneka or anybody else.
I was say, Nneka, sorry.
I live in Beverly Hills.
Pass out to Nneka.
I was excited about it.
I would say that, you know, that the opinions about the Red Line vary like any other project. I think overwhelmingly though, folks were looking forward to investment in neighborhoods that have not been invested in significantly since their, you know, at least in the last 50 or 60 years, since their populations began to shift. And that goes for every neighborhood from Upton to Poppleton to Rosemont to Poplar Grove to Edmondson Village. So I think overwhelmingly people were looking forward to that investment. And there was a lot of community organizing and work that went into making the Red Line something that many people in community could get behind. And so it was a devastating blow to many for it to be canceled in favor of the Purple Line.
Okay, thank you. This one is definitely for Darin. Has Blue Water Baltimore considered pursuing the Miyawaki reforestation method for a faster or denser forestation for the large vacant space created by the highway to nowhere?
We have not. I'm curious about it and would love to learn. I don't know anything about it.
So whoever it was that
put that
in the
chat.
I can put the link in the chat. It just, within 10 years, you get a forest. It's just a systematic way of doing it, looking at the soil nutrients, then placing strategically local plantation in particular hierarchy of heights. I'll just put the link in.
Thank you.
And I'm going to make a note of who you are. Okay. Could we have a little more discussion of the efforts to stop displacement and redevelopment in Poppleton? This was briefly mentioned, but so much more needs to be done. I find it disgraceful that the Scott administration is going forward with this.
So in terms of, and this is in general for Poppleton and Harlem Park, there is a lot of work. The work that we do specifically around anti-displacement is focused on making sure homeowners in those footprints are able to get the homeowners tax credit and the homestead tax credit, which lowers their property taxes, because that is one of the main vectors for the disruption of homeownership is high property taxes. And that's without getting into a discussion of how property taxes are disproportionately high in neighborhoods that have high levels of blight. So we're doing a lot of work surrounding making sure that folks are getting their property tax credits. And now that there's all this COVID-related homeowners assistance funds this year, we're focused on making sure folks get those funds to clear property taxes, water bill, to redeem ground rent, which we know is another vector for home loss. But also making sure that folks are able to get rental assistance, because, you know, as much as home ownership is important for community, it's also important for people to be able to rent places that are clean and in good condition. So there's some work happening there. There's development happening, like I mentioned, with Parity Homes. So there are a number of things that are happening. The legal service providers are making sure that folks have their estate plans together so that when people transition, the homes are not left in limbo. So it's a lot of work being done, mostly around elders, low-income homeowners, and disabled homeowners to really stop stop displacement and stabilize their housing outcomes.
Thank you. This is for Darin. Can the hidden streams be brought up and thereby make a lake?
I don't know. I don't know what the hydrology is of the site. That'd be cool. But I mean, cool. Would the neighborhood want it? I'd love to have another place to go fishing. You'd be surprised by my answer. But yeah, we're looking to daylight streams where we can. That's a great idea. I mean, anything, water is such a calming presence. If that could help and be an asset to the community, part of the healing, that'd be great.
We also have another suggestion. I would be curious to hear more about community-owned controlled compost facility that could be constructed in the highway to nowhere. So lots of ideas of different ways that we might be able to use. But as Pastor Brenda said, it's going to be a challenge to find the people right, that have left and see how can we rejuvenate this community.
However, our cistern will be online this spring as well as our composter. So we're going forward with what we have.
Absolutely. What about building over the highway? I know that plans are designed for buildings over it, grocery stores, a large neighborhood center, one overpass with a group of small shops. These would connect the two neighborhoods.
Those are definitely things that folks in community have talked about, have discussed. And I think there was an actual plan that some of the groups kind of put together with the University of Maryland, and some of that kind of stuff is covered in there. The physical process of developing or redeveloping the highway to nowhere, we can do. I mean, man has been to the moon. This isn't rocket science. It's a matter of whether the investment or how to do the investment in ways that are reparative, not in ways that continue the exploitation that has occurred.
Thanks. I've had a request, Donzel Brown from the Environmental Justice Journalism Institute wants to just pop in and talk for a second. Manzel, go ahead.
Yeah, just 1 second. I wanna thank you, Bonnie, for everything you've done to put this together. I want to thank Sean for his work on the movie. I want to thank Rona Cabell, helping found Edgy. I think we're gonna sign off now, but I just want to give thanks to all of our panelists. And that was amazing input. And if anyone'd like to reach out at us at Edgy, our information is in the chat. And we really appreciate the opportunity to work with Interfaith. Bonnie, you know, we've gone back a long way.
Thanks,
and we've done a lot of good work. And
yeah.
I really appreciate the organization and what they do. And we'll continue to work together. And we have another film that will be coming out, working with you guys.
That's right, for next year. Hopefully by
for next year. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And happy Martin Luther King.
So one of the things that someone asked, is there any legislation state this year that you would like support for? So I'll just plug our legislative briefing that's coming up on January 30th once again. But there's a environmental human rights amendment that we are working on, and 30 by 30 trying to preserve land. So check back on the 30th, register for that tonight before you sign off, and join us to hear about those different legislative issues.
Bonnie, one more thing, if I can.
Yeah.
If you could send me information on that meeting, you know that I work in other areas.
Yes.
And I would like to be part of that if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks all of you for sticking around. This must be interesting if we still almost have 100 people here. So I'll keep going as long as you guys are interested in hanging around. That's great. We're thrilled. So I think I asked them, how is Poppleton doing in trying to hold off out-of-state developers from New York who apparently have plans to gentrify the area?
Well, given the fact that Poppleton is about 50% vacant, and given the fact that Harlem Park is about 50% vacant, I would say not all that well. And that is, again, no fault of the residents. It is absolutely the fault of the policymakers. And to be clear, what we see in Poppleton and Harlem Park and Upton and Sandtown, Winchester today is not the result of what has happened in the last 5 years. It's the result, it's the cumulative result of what has happened in the last 50 years, largely, but in the previous 450 years as well. So I just want to be clear, because there's folks will quickly say, what is the mayor doing? What is the president of the city council doing? But what we're really talking about is what did Mayor Schaefer do? What we're really talking about was what was done by Mayor Mahou and what was done by William H. Preston, not necessarily what was done in the last 10 or 15 years, if that answers the question.
Thank you.
And I concur. This is mayors going way back in city councils and census maps and everything. So this is generational. This is decades that is now being addressed.
This is the question I had. I wonder if any of you have the answer. So I'm not sure who asked this. Where was all the dirt taken when the road was built? And is it still there? Can we fill it back in? Nobody knows where the dirt went, huh?
40 years ago.
But if we want to fill it back in, I live near Herring Run Park, and there's Mount Dirt near the Sinclair Lane in Herring Run, so we can just take that and bring it. It's down by Oliver Brewing Company. If anybody's been down there, near the post office, downstream of Sinclair Lane along Herring Run. The dirt that was hauled away from the Druid Hill project ended up being, most of it went to a responsible location, but we did find somebody dumping it illegally, and we prosecuted that illegal dumping going on. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know where it went.
Yeah, that is great. Something to think about. And yeah, what could we do if we filled it back in? This question is for Sean Yost. You're still here, so I'll pose this one to you. What about the Afro-American or the Maryland collection at the Central Enoch Pratt? Wouldn't they have pictures and historical documents of the area? Also, could a college or university have students who could do research to find displaced residents and their heirs?
Well, certainly the Afro has an extensive archives, one of the most extensive in the United States, as a matter of fact. I actually got those photos that I used for the film from Philip Merrill, who owns and operates Nanny Jack, which has a huge archive of historic photos of West Baltimore. But there are other sources indeed, and the Afro is one of them. And very importantly, the Afro obviously would have documentation of what happened leading up to the construction of the Highway to Nowhere in West Baltimore stories. That part of the process of creating a larger film would incorporate use of Afro archives, not just for images, but for the documentation of what transpired in the process leading up to the building of the Highway to Nowhere, then the sensation of that construction. So it's very important that we continue to do the research and the historical recon, that I call it, to really dig down deep, and so that we don't revisit this, and that we can truly begin the process of repair, not just in this situation, but many, many situations in our city that we love so much.
And I can chime in. Former residents are not as hard to find as some may think. When we cleared off the lots across from Allen, and when we cleaned up the old Model Park, there were two huge reunion events that just organically appeared. People who used to live, who tell their story, who even come by once the pollinator garden was out, they came by to see and to stop and to tell their story. And so the people, they're not hard to find. People know people, and they tell people, and they come together. And the only thing that was asked is for the bagging of their trash, and they did that. But we had two organic events at two parts last summer of former residents who, once the place was clean, they came and had a reunion.
Thank you. One thing I want to point out, because I recognize some of the faces that are still left in the room, and I get this question all the time, and it is a One Water Partnership type of question. So, you know, whether you're a congregation that's in the heart of Baltimore City or a suburban congregation that's in the area, we all have a part to do and a role that we can play in helping in this healing. So yes, we want to take our cues from the community, but we need to stand ready to support them, not just physically to plant the trees, although, you know, Darin wants you to come and do that, but politically as well. So when they're working to change regulations or rules that are going to go into effect, they're going to need the support of people that don't necessarily live in the city to say, this is what we want to see happen, and we are supporting those communities, and to speak out on behalf of them as well. So just wanted to say that. I did get a question. This is interesting. So is there any truth, does any one of you know if there's any truth to the story that my husband was told growing up in Baltimore, that the road was built to punish the Black community after the 1968 riot?
I'd like to comment on that.
Yes.
I don't know if that actually happened. Nneka's shaking her head. She may know specifically, but what has happened prior to that and subsequently is that there have been punitive policies against Black communities in Baltimore for generations. It seems like almost all policy directed at Black communities has been punitive. So it would not be shocking to me to find out that this was a punitive recourse against Black citizens of Baltimore. We know for a fact that Robert Moses himself, a virulent racist, was brought into Baltimore specifically to be consulted on the building of the highway to nowhere that was eventually built in West Baltimore. And we start the film with a quote from Robert Moses, and he shows his true self, who he really was. And he implemented urban renewal or slum removal. Negro removal was also a term used when it came to disruption of Black communities across the United States. So certainly it would not be surprising if the Highway to Nowhere was a punitive measure against the Black community.
So I don't know explicitly that was the intent in this particular case, but to further Sean's point, we do know that in St. Augustine, Florida, that the highway was run through the Black parts of that community as an explicit punishment for civil rights activists attempting to integrate public park facilities and a pool. So in at least one case in the United States, we know for a fact that the highway was used to punish folks for attempting to execute and receive their human rights. So it would not surprise me in Baltimore if that was the case with the highway. Though I think that in Baltimore, what you've actually seen more explicitly, the punishment happened in this case with taking money that should have gone to shore up Pennsylvania Avenue, which is not very far from the Highway to Nowhere, instead being used to develop One Charles Plaza and the Inner Harbor. That was the more explicit punishment for the uprising that happened in '68. And so in any way, shape, or form, to Sean's point, it has been, policy has been used to punish Black folks from the very beginning, which is why we couldn't own carts and drays in the 1800s, right? These are very explicit kind of ways to make you not be able to live economically. So I think there is some truth implicitly, if not explicitly, to what you were told.
Thank you. So Patricia Waddy has had her hand up. Yes, go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. I believe I'm unmuted. Hi, how is everyone? I'm really appreciating this program. It's very interesting. I lived in the 1100 block of Franklin Street. My house was acquired by the city, and after some number of years, the purpose was urban renewal, and that was the quote that was used in all the literature. The plans were more extensive than they actually managed to carry out, but we did have to move as a result of the urban renewal coming in. But the plans had actually been proposed, and they were working on the urban renewal plans in the 50s. And so the 1968 had very little to do. I mean, it was all done by then. They had already torn down the properties by 1968. So, and they had even built bridges down in the connection to 95 and 395 that they ended up tearing down because they weren't going to be able to build that extension, and they weren't going to be able to build the other end up in Hilton Parkway in Evanston Village. So that's how we ended up with the Highway to Nowhere, because we started in the middle and they couldn't connect the ends to anything. So that's how it ended up being a Highway to Nowhere. But it was, in fact, started in the 50s. And I have some documentation, letters from the city to my parents regarding obtaining the property. I would like to also get, and I don't think I was able to capture the information so that I can provide some documentation that I have to Mr. Yos, who is, who's working on the video.
Yes.
Also.
You remember that slide where I said IPC is a connector? We will connect you. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm not sure if it's Paul Evans or Evan Paul. I think you can unmute yourself if you want to try to do that.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Yep. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay.
You're welcome.
Just to introduce myself, I'm Evans Paul. I'm a retired city planner, and I'm writing a book about the road wars entitled "Stop the Road." So I've done extensive research on the issues related to the highway to nowhere, and I think I can say pretty definitively that the highway to nowhere was not a punitive thing against the African American community because of the riots. The timing is basically all wrong, as the previous speaker was mentioning. There certainly is a very strong racial angle to it, starting with Robert Moses being very explicitly racist and wanting to use the highway as a vehicle for slum clearance. And that kind of thinking, using the highway as a vehicle for slum clearance, was still prevalent in the 1960s. It slowly gave way in later decades, both for the urban renewal program and for the highway program, but was still there in the 1960s. The procession of events was essentially that the Leakin Park segment was stopped by legal action in 1972, but in 1973, the city still decided to build the highway to nowhere. And this was basically Schaefer building the expressways. He was adamant about trying to complete the expressway system, and he was building it basically anywhere that he could. He was stopped by legal action in Leakin Park. He was stopped by legal action in Fells Point, and even the I-95 segment that was built at the Fort McHenry Tunnel and all, that was slowed down by regulation. So he had no obstacles to build the highway to nowhere, so he did it. And I think everybody that was connected to that project regards it as a terrible decision in retrospect. But that was more or less how it happened.
Thanks, Evan, for chiming in, and feel free to let us know about your book. I'm sure folks would be really interested to delve a little bit deeper. There was a question here from, hold on, Danforth to Nneka and Darin. If there was an early urban renewal plan for the highway to nowhere, isn't it important to get that plan amended through legal city planning, zoning, and city council like now?
So I think the original urban planning, urban renewal plan is expired. I think it was a 50-year plan. I do know that in Harlem Park in Sandtown, Winchester, the community is currently undergoing a neighborhood planning, used to be called master planning process right now. Upton just went through one in 2014. And I believe that Poppleton went through a similar process in the last 10 years. And so I think that has had that to a certain degree has happened, but I'm not 100% sure if what they've done has overwritten what was set in the original urban renewal plan.
Thank you. I'm going to take one last one. Mary Rose just raised her hand, and then I think we will close out because our panelists have been very generous with their time this evening. And so, Mary Rose, go ahead.
Yep, this is just a Nick. I'm sorry. I lived in Fells. I was the second wave that came into Fells Point. And one of the things we were told about the building of the highway to nowhere was that the city had already taken money for the new police headquarters, and they would have had to give the money back
if they didn't build any part of the road. So they took the path of least resistance. They horribly, horribly took the path of least resistance. I don't know if that's true or not, but it was certainly a dreadful decision for the people who lived there.
Thank you, Mary Rose. So with that, I think we will call it an evening. Thank you for sticking around after hours. Really appreciate all your time and your attention. You know, I just imagined us if we were in Brenda's church, or we'd be standing around having a cup of coffee or a hot chocolate right now, and we could mill around for a while. But it's tiring to sit in front of these Zoom screens for hours on end. So thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. Fill out the survey, connect with our events. Florida, Baltimore, we all need help caring for all these trees. We're gonna have tons of trees to go into neighborhoods like this coming down the pipe. So we're definitely interested to engage with everyone to do that. So thank you, everyone. There's the link to the survey one more time. Please fill that out. Thank you, Pastor White. Thank you, Nneka. Thank you, Darin. Sean, thank you for your effort. I hope we can support you in making sure this becomes, I just recently heard we have several highways to nowhere throughout in Detroit and in many cities across the United States, and their stories are now beginning to be told, and it would be great if Baltimore was included so that we have a full reckoning of at least what happened in the past and as we move to the future. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.